Hi, baddies.
What's up, guys?
We are on episode 3 of Beauty and Inked. We are here to talk today about life as an addict and life married to an addict.
It's a pretty serious topic as opposed to some of our other lighter, more fun conversations, but definitely one that's important nonetheless, and something that I feel like is not a unique thing that we struggle with, because there's a lot of people who struggle with addiction and who are also married to individuals who do struggle with addiction. So today we'll be deep diving into a little bit of what that looks like for the both of us.
I feel like this also ties into our last podcast, which our last podcast tied into our first podcast. So we're just trying to keep like the trend of seriousness alive. If we're talking serious, so that they all kind of click together. So how mental health plays a role into addiction and vice versa, and how your mental health matters as someone who is married to or in a relationship with, or siblings, friends, whoever that's in your circle that makes you feel like you can relate to this. Your mental health and how you cope with that relationship matters as well. So that's kind of what we're diving into today. So we're going to start with talking about where you kind of got into addiction, kind of where this started, because it's not like you wake up one day and you're like, you know what, sounds really freaking cool.
Yeah,
let's go do
right.
some drugs. So
Yeah, for sure.
How did this journey start for you? Where did it kind of lead to? And then at what point were you like, this can't be the way I live my entire life? And what do you do now to kind of cope with all of that? So let's kind of dive into that.
Absolutely. So first and foremost, I think it's important to note that I do have a predisposition to addiction just because of my childhood. So both my parents were addicts, and one of them has been in recovery for some time now and is achieving sobriety very well. But it is something that was very predominant in all of my life, as far as addiction and exposure to different substances in order to cope with different aspects of one's life. So there's that. So then when struggles in my adult life happened, it was almost very commonplace for that to be an option to choose. And then, when things kind of hit the fan as far as like my past relationship was concerned, and some other very horrendous things that happened, that's what led me to trying my drug of choice for the very first time. And prior to this, I had experimented with lesser things. I've smoked weed, I drank, dabbled in some cocaine and things like that. But it wasn't until some very serious things happened in my adult life that I ended up trying heroin for the first time. And opiates are very different than a lot of the other things that I dabbled in. It's almost as if they kind of get their hooks in you after that first use, and then you immediately crave more, not just mentally, but very much physically as well.
It's almost like the weed, the drinking, the cocaine, those are more considered, like, people think of those as like your party drugs, your recreational, those are social, right? And then which, not that you can't have issues with those three, not that you can't have addictions to those, and it can be a slippery slope into the more harsh substances. But it's different to kind of push those ones onto a back burner when you dabble in the harder and the harsher substances.
Yeah, and I feel like it also is a difference in the method to the madness, because those party drugs you're using to almost have a good time, and to kind of party away your worries and things like that, versus some of the more, like you said, harsher things such as heroin or fentanyl and the things that I was using. It was definitely more so to cope with the other things that were going on in my life. I definitely wasn't using these particular substances to party or to have a good time. I was using them to definitely mask a lot of my PTSD and my mental health issues that I didn't have the strength or capacity to deal with at the time. So yeah, that was kind of the reason for my usage. And it's addiction is a very interesting thing. I mean, rock bottom looks different for every person. And I genuinely feel like in addiction, you do have to reach your own version of rock bottom in order to decide to come out of it.
Because rock bottom doesn't look the same for everybody. For some people, it's completely unhoused, completely without income, completely just that level of detachment from society and from your original livelihood, where I know for you would have never let yourself get to that point. You would have, as serious and unfortunate as it is to say, you would have taken your own life before you lost your home, your cars, all of those things. So I know that was something that you held really close to you, is even though I'm using and I'm in active addiction, I still own a home, I still have 2 cars, I still own my own business. You were still very prideful.
I was a very functioning addict.
Yes.
Very much so.
Yes. And I know that's something that you struggled with when you moved here on your sober journey.
Yeah.
But we'll circle back to that in
for
a little
sure.
bit.
Yeah. And going back to the rock bottom thing, I remember asking my mother, who is a recovering addict as well. I remember asking her, like, what is rock bottom? What does that look like? Because at the time, I didn't feel like I was there yet, even though at the time of this conversation, I was going through very painful withdrawal symptoms. And she looked at me and got teary-eyed and said, "Honey, you reach rock bottom when you stop digging. When you stop digging that hole, that's when you're at the bottom." And that resonated a lot with me, because it's this freaking cave that you just dig yourself further and further into, and the deeper you get into addiction, it's harder and more physically painful to climb out of.
And we've found references that have literally said, like, same with emotions and mental health, similar to addiction, is you are going to get to this point where you're in the well and you look up and you're like, how the hell am I going to get out of this? And you can either keep going further and it's going to take you longer and it's going to be harder to get out, or you can kind of stay at that halfway point or however far you are before you're all the way to the bottom and kind of get out. The longer you sit at the bottom of the well, the harder it feels and the more impossible it feels to get all the way out of the well.
Absolutely. And the thing about addiction is it is a disease that its ultimate goal is to kill you, right? And it'll romanticize your drug of choice. It will romanticize the days of using, and it will romanticize pretty much everything until you get to that point where you are not alive anymore, unfortunately. And it's crazy to look back and see my life and where it is now versus where it was before, because there were times that I did overdose, and I would get back up and go right back to doing the same shit. And it's very sad to admit those things, but it's true, and it just shows how deep of a hold addiction has on you, and how much you're willing to disregard your own means of survival in order to continue to feed this demon inside of you that somehow has convinced you that this is the solution to
that this
your
is
problems.
Survival.
Yeah,
that this is you surviving from whatever that traumatic instance in your life is that brought you to addiction. It makes you believe that your mom and many of the older people in the sober community call him Slick.
Yes. Slick sits on your shoulder and tells you, like, oh, well, no one's gonna find out, or oh, you have an opportunity, oh, things are getting bad again, maybe you should think about it, and that's the disease talking, right? It's literally a when I'm in my NA meetings, every NA meeting starts the same, and we read the same literature, because we need to be reminded that this is an incurable disease that we do have to continuously work on and continuously try to keep ourselves in check, because if you don't, it will come back. And the last meeting that I went to talked about the difference between recovery and clean time, because those are two things that go hand in hand that I feel like not a lot of people realize, especially when it comes to opiates and more heavier drugs. Not saying it, like I said, not negating the struggles with the other drugs, but a lot of opioid users I find are trying to suppress a very intense pain within ourselves. And the difference between clean time and recovery, right, is being in recovery is working on the part of you that needed the solution of drugs and alcohol, because a lot of misconceptions about addiction is that it's that the drug or the alcohol is the problem. And for many drug addicts and for many people who struggle, it was the solution to our problem. It was the remedy. It was the only thing that made us feel better at the time. So recovery is looking at why we picked up the drug in the first place and dealing with that type of personal character defect, that type of trauma, and there's a lot of personality traits associated with people who are drug addicts, one of which being wanting to hide and recluse and to be, and I know we talked about this in our last podcast, about being a turtle inside of my shell, right? That is an addict trait, because you definitely want to isolate and to just recluse so that it's just you, your pain, and your solution to your pain. And then it's just this horrible little cycle that continues round and round, and then, down.
Unfortunately for you, you had so many, and this goes for many people who grew up in the home of addiction and just that's all they knew. You have those traits and those tendencies before you even pick up your first substance, before you even take your first drug, before any of that, before your first sip of alcohol. You already have those addictive tendencies and those addictive traits well before the addiction is actively in play.
Absolutely.
Because that's all you've seen the people around you do. So when it comes to recovery versus clean time is just how long have you been without a substance?
Right.
How long have you been clean? Versus recovery is the healing behind it.
And that's the hard work.
Healing is hard. I am so sick and tired of hearing how beautiful healing is, how beautiful recovery is, because it's not. It sucks. It hurts. And honestly, it is terrible. It is great on the other side, but while you are actively healing and fixing all these pieces of yourself and dealing with all of the whys and the whats and the who did this to me's, it is very painful, and it takes a while to get to the other side. And I know I've told you that multiple times. Even when I was helping you move down here, I was actively telling you, this is not going to be the easy route.
Yeah.
But it will be the better route.
Yes.
And we were just having a conversation not long ago about how now that you've gotten so far in your recovery, you either are going to keep fighting, you're at a fork in the road. You are always at a fork in the road, but now you're so far down this road where the fork is always following you, right? Where now that you're up here with the same fork in the road, it is equally as hard to keep going and keep on your recovery, keep on your healing, keep moving forward in a positive way, or it's going to be really hard to also go all the way back to the beginning to use again. So that's kind of the one thing that I like to look at is, as much as it's hard to keep going and keep pushing, at some point it gets just as hard to shatter the life that you've built and everything that you've entangled yourself with positively.
100%.
To unravel all of that and go back to using.
100%. And, I feel like going back to using, now that I have gotten through the withdrawal period, it's almost like part of what motivates me to continue to be sober is the fear of withdrawal. Because if anybody who's watching has struggled with any sort of addiction, you know how painful that is. And it's very, very painful. Heroin and fentanyl to detox from is no joke. I mean, I remember literally laying on my bed fucking thrashing because it hurt.
Well, and we've heard the same from our friends that are even have previously been meth users, that have been on crack cocaine, that even people that are continuously drinking alcohol.
Oh yeah, alcohol withdrawals is no joke too.
Yeah,
when I was in detox, I was with someone who was detoxing from alcohol, and they had to put him on seizure medication, because
Yeah.
it's very common for people withdrawing from alcohol to have seizures. For opioid users, they believe it or not, they give us pain meds. Obviously this is under medical supervision, and they're not trying to give us something to get us high, but
Right.
it's a very, very painful experience. So that's another difficult thing to. It almost scares you, and it scares you straight. You know what I mean? Because
We have a Post-it note on our mirror in the hallway. Our home is filled with mirrors because, not that we're vain, but like
we're big into self-love.
We're big into self-love. And I had listened to a podcast previously about how I was moving into my apartment post-divorce, post-horrible relationship, and I was trying to heal myself. In the podcast that I was listening to, he had mentioned if you feel like you're going to be alone, put mirrors around your house. That way it'll make you feel like you're surrounded by more people. So anyways, so we have mirrors all over our house, and the one that's straight down the hallway is chunks of different pieces of mirror, and one of them has fuck day 0 on it, because it's in her handwriting. She put that together when she was actively going through withdrawal, and we keep that up there on every day, all day, every day. It'll probably be up there forever.
Yeah.
Because again, back to your point, this is a lifelong journey. As much as healing from other traumatic situations where we have mental and physical pain, you're trying to heal from that, but you're also trying to tell yourself not to use your coping skill.
Yeah.
The one thing that you felt like worked the most, and the reason you feel like it works so well, is because it completely shuts everything off.
Yes.
And granted, we can say all of these things, and everybody's journey with addiction and their substance of choice and their trauma that led them to that is going to be different. So if we're saying anything and you feel like that doesn't hit exactly with your story, that's because everybody is different and everybody's journey is different. Everybody's
This is just
healing
our
journey.
Experience and my personal experience with my personal drug of choice.
And while this is your first time dealing with addiction and on such a high scale and pulling yourself out of it, this is not my first rodeo being around a loved one with addiction. So like you said, there's a lot of
experience with addiction and being with someone with addiction.
Well, much to your point, I feel like there are a lot of tendencies that go hand in hand. That's why I feel like what we're saying very much relates to a lot of people, but some things do differ. Because, however, I have been around probably a little bit of everything. I have been sober for, aside an occasional glass of wine or an espresso martini, I have been sober essentially my entire life. I smoked weed pretty consistently for a while. Like about 10 years probably. But when I was going through my divorce and everything, I stopped smoking weed because it was giving me crippling anxiety. So, but aside from that, like, never touched any hard drugs. However, I always find myself surrounded by loved ones of some way, shape, or form that have experienced that. I know I have family members that have struggled post-medical care with pain medication and pills. I know that in my past relationship, my ex-wife is an alcoholic, and she was previously an addict to other substances as well. So I dealt firsthand with alcoholism and how that affects not just that person, but how it affects you in your life. I was surrounded by a bunch of party goers who did a lot of cocaine on a Thursday through Monday basis, and then it turned into Monday through Sunday basis. I am now married to you. So I feel like for me, oh yeah, and my one of my best friends in the entire world, he is a recovering meth addict. So we've got a lot of boxes checked off in all of those categories. So I feel like for me, I like to fix things. I like to fix people. I like to help people. And so for me, I feel like I'm automatically drawn to those scenarios because I've helped heal myself from traumatic instances. I know when I first found out about my ex-wife's affair, I was drinking pretty heavily for a couple months. And I feel like that was a monkey see, monkey do, because she was an alcoholic. And so I was just like, that sounds like a great way to cope with this. It didn't take me long to go, this is not the life I want to live. So then when I started to recognize that the other people around me struggled with addictive tendencies or personalities, I felt inclined to help in the best ways that I could, the best ways that I knew how, kind of how I was pulling myself out. Granted, I wouldn't say that like I was an alcoholic or I struggled with alcoholism or anything like that. I would just say that like I went through a really hard time. I could see clearly how numbing your pain through those avenues was easy to do. And so I wanted to help the people that I continued to gravitate towards by showing them what I did instead. How it was that is not the life that I want to live. I had people that lived, because at the time I lived here in Nebraska, I was having people that were reaching out to me from Minnesota that I barely associated with. They just saw how I was living my life through social media saying, are you okay? You're drinking a lot. And so that was kind of that, shit, I don't want to do this, you know? So I think that for me, like I said, I gravitate towards helping people in those situations. And I just want to be able to like almost shake my loved ones and be like, let me fucking help you see that like numbing the problem isn't going to make it any better. Yeah. As far as like, how do I cope with having so many loved ones that are either in, at this moment, nobody in my immediate circle, in my immediate life is in active addiction. Mm-hmm. Everyone is in recovery. And so for me, I think when the hard times come and I hear from you or any of our friends or even my family members that I know have struggled, I know that when they come to me or that conversation arises of, God, I've had such a hard day, I just want to use, I have to try and tell myself, how can I help this person, but also how can I not internalize it? Because it's not my fault, nor is it my responsibility that somebody wants to use, and it's not my responsibility to maintain someone's sobriety. You can support someone in every avenue possible. You can try to be there and give them as many tools and remind them of their own tools in their own toolbox, but it ultimately, in this specific avenue of self-soothing, you kind of have to let people have to come to that conclusion on their own. You are not going to be able to drag anybody to rehab. You are not going to be able to drag anybody to detox, because even if you drop them off there, if they're not doing the work in there, they're going to come out and they're going to do the exact same thing.
Absolutely. If someone's not ready to get sober, there's nothing, and I know that sounds grim. It really does. But if someone's not ready to get sober, there's nothing you can do to make them get sober. Nope. Even if you do shake them and be like, do you realize that you're going to die? That's the nature of the disease, is it's trying to kill said person.
I had a friend who had been struggling very heavily with consistent daily use of cocaine. Like, consistent daily use. Like, we're talking like chain smoking cigarettes, doing cocaine. And she was supposed to come and visit me and have a trip. And her mom called me and begged me to let her stay for longer than the allotted time of her vacation, because she wanted me to help heal her and help give her a better avenue and better life. And I was in the worst parts of my relationship and the worst parts of my life where I was like, one, I can't provide that because I don't even know how to take care of myself right now, and I'm trying to figure out enough here. Two, there is not going to be anything I can do for this woman if she doesn't want to change it, because as soon as she goes home, if she goes back to hanging out with those same people, going to those same houses, hanging around that same boy, it's going to be the exact same. You quite literally have to change your entire environment. And I know that a lot of the people that I've surrounded myself with that are in active recovery have said before, like, that's one of the hardest pieces, is having to let go of all the friends, the family, and the people you associate with.
Yeah.
That you did those
But
drugs
were
with.
they your friends? Were they your friends?
That's what I was just gonna get to.
You know, what friend will, you know, because in my situation, I had something very terrible happen to me. And I went to someone who I thought was a friend, and the solution was heroin. And that's not something that a friend will do to you. That's something that an opportunist will do, because misery loves company, right? And addicts love when other people are using too, because not only does it validate what they're doing, but if you're using too, you're going to help buy the supply, especially if you're someone who has their shit together like I did, and who did own their own business and have, you know, avenues of money to provide, you know, for said group of people. But friends don't contribute to the downfall of your existence. Friends help raise you up. You know?
That's something you and I had just talked about not long ago. Again, like, this is a pretty consistent conversation in our marriage, just because we are actively going through recovery. We are still so close with so many people that are friends and family that are also in active recovery, that it's just a very prominent conversation in our life. And that was something that we had talked about one day, was, but were those people good friends for you? Because your friends now will come to you and say, hey, we've got all these great solutions. We can go to a meeting. Let's book like an emergency therapy appointment. Let's go fishing. Let's go photosynthesize and hang out in the sun. Let's go get some ice cream. Let's go, whatever it is you need to do, let's go do it, right? Like, how often when we're having a bad day do we go grab dinner with our best friends and we go to the bookstore? You know what I mean? Just a quick, let's do something else, where previously, when you surround yourself, and again, that comes from when you're in that environment consistently of growing up, that also leads to the friends that you're going to put yourself with, because that's all you know.
Right.
So when you don't know any better, you just don't know any better. You don't know what you don't know.
Right.
So when you go to those same people and ask them, hey, I need to talk right now. I need some help. This happened to me. And they're like, oh, I'm so sorry. You want to do some drugs? Literally. And you're in your most vulnerable state, because I can see how that would happen, because the people that I was hanging out with when I was going through my divorce, they were like, hell yeah, Becca's out. She's partying. She's drinking. And then when I was like, whoa, I have been like Thursday through Sunday. And then Mondays, we found out that our favorite martini bar did buy one, get one for a penny. Thursday through Monday, we were going out and we were having cocktails. We were going out to the clubs. We were having a good time. And I was like, whoa. I don't want to do this. Those same people were kind of like, well, we have all these concerts coming up. We are going on vacations. What do you mean you're going to get sober? And I was like, I mean, I'm going to... You can live your life without smoking weed, without doing cocaine, without drinking, without any substance. You can actually have a really beautiful life. I just went to the best concert of my entire life, and all I drank was a freaking bottle of water. That's what was in my hand. The entire concert was a bottle of water the whole time, because you don't have to be in a state of mind where you're not present.
Yeah. And I feel like when you get sober, you get to see who your friends really are. When I was in rehab, one of the things, because I struggled with that a lot too, because obviously you care about these people. You know, you have similar struggles. A lot of people who I met in my addiction had very similar stories to what I had just experienced. And, you know, a lady in rehab, one of the counselors said to me, because I had said, like, well, I can't just leave my friends here, you know? And she goes, honey, they are not your friends. They are your enemy in disguise. And I feel...
A wolf in sheep's clothing.
Absolutely, because, you know, when you get sober, you get to see who really actually cares about you versus who's using you to validate their own behavior, right? Because you don't need to use alcohol or drugs or anything like that to have a good time. And furthermore, it kind of shows, like, who respects you enough as a person, because when you get sober, like I said, I feel like it reveals who your true friends are, because those same people who are, like, saying that they have your highest good when you're like, oh, I don't want want to drink anymore. And then they're like, well, what do you mean? Why aren't you don't want to have a good time anymore? You're just going to be the boring friend? Like, no, I'm going to be the healthiest version of myself. Do you have a problem with that?
Because it's really fun to go out all night and then come in and, in the industry that we're in, right, come in and take clients and be like, I'm freaking hungover, dude.
Oh, in the tattoo community? Hell yeah. In the tattoo community, it is very commonplace for drugs and alcohol and all of those
I feel like
things.
that's another thing we should have touched on before we shifted over to, like, my experience as being sober, or California sober, as some people would call it, from my previous experiences. How my experience, before talking about me, my experiences, how I cope with all these things, we should have talked a little bit about how you, as a tattoo artist surrounded by people in the industry, and how common it actually is to have your mentors and your coworkers in some shops be not sober.
Yeah.
And they struggle with the same thing. I know that that's something that I've heard from a lot of my girlfriends that are in the bar industry, is how common it is for drugs to be being done in the bathroom, in the car on the way into the shift,
Yes.
et cetera, et cetera. So I know you've talked a little bit about how that is, and I know many of my tattoo artists that I have had over the years have said the same thing. Like, oh yeah, girl, you have no idea how common it is for drugs to be in the industry.
So common. It is so, the tattoo industry is very saturated with drugs, especially cocaine and, amphetamines, or even oxy. I remember, in my young tattoo days, that I learned a lot about drugs, because there was one time in particular, I worked with someone who, he was working with some substances in the back room, and I was like, why is your cocaine pink? And he was like, that's oxy. And I'm like, oh, my bad. So it's very common, and I feel like that's because of a couple of different reasons. I feel like, for the biggest reason being, as I said previously, is art doesn't come from a happy place sometimes. And I feel like a lot of artists struggle with mental illness, right? And when you are a creative person, you do process things in a little bit different way than someone who's more of an analytical brain. You take things to heart, and it can be a struggle to experience a lot of these things. And if you sprinkle on top of that some, childhood trauma or even adult trauma, it creates quite the recipe for a need for self-soothing, right? And then if you also take into consideration that we are a cash business and you are your own boss. So you make your own schedule. There's no one to hold you accountable other than yourself, and you are paid every single day in cash. So I feel like that's why the tattoo industry is so oversaturated, is because it really is almost the perfect place for an addict to wind up, as far as to be a functional addict, especially because a lot of people who are tattoo artists, they do have a criminal record. Some of them actually learned how to tattoo in jail and in prison, and then they come out and then they do it as a professional means. So it really is, and I'm not saying that that's every tattoo artist.
I was gonna say, we'd like to preface, not all tattoo artists are doing substance.
Clearly I'm over here sober. So,
right, not everyone does substances. They don't all come from a criminal background, but that is a very common thing that we see in that industry. Yeah,
there was actually a guy who I worked with for a very short amount of time who was a felon, and he's a very talented tattoo artist. Wound up on Inked magazine, very successful, all of these things. And I asked him, I'm like, well, what made you get into tattooing? And he said that he was a convicted felon, and in order to get a job, the choices were being a welder or being a tattoo artist. And he was like, I can express myself more with tattooing, and it's less hot. So he chose to be a tattoo artist. So, yeah.
And that's a conversation for something else, on how we need to do better for convicted felons when they get out of the system, and giving them more options to better themselves.
Right, because you're just going to perpetuate the cycle. That's a societal critique.
Just circling us all the way back, I definitely, to my previous point, you can't help somebody who doesn't want the help.
Right.
Because they are going to continue to want to be in that cycle. It doesn't matter if they go to jail. It doesn't matter about rehab. It doesn't matter about detox. If they don't want to better themselves, they won't.
Right.
So I feel like that has been kind of the definitive factor for me as far as being able to tell myself, you've done what you can. It's time to let that person figure it out. And kind of having to be like, especially because I am not one to sugarcoat shit. I have never been that person. I've never been that friend. I've never been that spouse, whatever. If you come to me and you ask my opinion, I will give it. It is going to be raw. It is going to be very unfiltered. If you don't like it, you shouldn't have asked for my opinion. I won't give unsolicited advice because I don't like to get it myself. But if you ask, I will give you my opinion. It will be factually based as well, though. But then I will tell you, but you are an adult. Do what you wish with my advice, my opinion, whatever. And you can go forth from there. So but again, you can only help someone so much. So you can also only say things to somebody so many times before you're like, what do you want from me? What do you want me to say anymore? What do you want me to, what do you need from me at this point? You know, because after so many continued little TED Talks over FaceTime or sitting in the basement of your house or in the parking lot in a car, whatever that may be, you can only give somebody a little TED Talks. You can only send so many inspirational songs, reels, podcasts. You can only do so much to hold that person's hand before it becomes you are the person that they call every time they're in a shitstorm. You answer, you listen, you talk, they go right back to it. So they feel like they have somebody that they can always call when they're in the shit.
And then they just stick their head back in the toilet.
And I